So the book of Genesis is the biblical story of beginning. Genesis, the word literally means beginning. And it tells us about the beginning of the world, tells us about the beginning of people. It tells us about the primitive beginnings of civilization. As you know from Scripture, there was a point fairly early on in human history that the world got so evil so quickly that God needed to, in effect, set the reset button, push the reset button, and there was a flood. And then we come to Genesis 10, which is after this restart. And Genesis 10 has a listing of the sons and the grandsons and the great-grandsons of Noah. And there's probably 75 or so names that are listed in Genesis 10, and none of them except one name says anything about who they were. There's one name that there is 4 sentences, short sentences of description, not because the other people, their lives didn't matter and what they did, but this one particular name, how he used his life mattered and changed the course of history, according to Scripture. And so therefore his name is mentioned, and his name is Nimrod. Now Nimrod comes from a Hebrew root word which means rebel. And specifically it means rebel against God. Now, Nimrod was probably not his actual name, but instead it was more than likely a nickname. It was a name that was talking about his character, what kind of person he was. And so, for all future Jewish readers who knew Hebrew, whenever they would see this name Nimrod in any story to follow, it was as though the writer is cueing them in as though they should be thinking rebel. Whatever we see and hear after his name is from a rebellious person. So he is mentioned in Genesis 10 as being a mighty warrior, a hunter, a ruler of a kingdom. Now, biblical sources that I've studied don't speak well of Nimrod and the type of person that he was, and also non-biblical sources that I've seen don't speak highly of this man's character. And when he is talked about as being a mighty warrior, it wasn't like he was fighting on behalf of his country in a noble way. He instead was more likely fighting to rule the world in a selfish way. And anybody that got into his way of ruling the world, he would conquer. And he was a mighty warrior in that sense. And even the term hunter didn't necessarily mean that he was just a good hunter of animals, but he also hunted people who, again, got in his way of conquest. And he was a ruler of a kingdom, which is interesting because in this early day of Scripture, there were not kingdoms yet until this guy comes along. For that matter, there were not cities yet until this guy comes along. People tended to spread out across the land by clans or by family units and did not cluster together in cities. But this guy, Nimrod, was interested in getting people to form into cities. In fact, he makes 8 different cities so that he can rule. Genesis 10 tells us that the first city that he makes among the 8 is a city called Babylon, which is in Iraq. Babylon, ancient Babylon, is about 50 miles from modern-day Baghdad. Babylon, the first place that Nimrod, this rebel against God, Nimrod, this one who chooses to use his life, his energy, his time in selfish ways, starts a city called Babylon in an area or a region in Iraq called Shinar. Now, Genesis 10 tells us all of this, and it doesn't really seem to matter too much until we start to put it together in chapter 11 of Genesis, where it says, now, the whole world had one language and a common speech. Now, when it speaks of the world, understand the world now has billions of people in it. The world then, in the early days, at this time after the flood, probably 200 or 300 years after the flood, only has thousands of people in it. So there's not a whole lot of people on the earth at this time, but it says the whole world had one language and one common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. The word Shinar now should cause us to think, because of what happened, what we were told about in chapter 10. Shinar, Shinar, that's the place where Babylon is. Babylon is the place that was started by a ruler named Nimrod. Nimrod was a selfish ruler who chose to use his life to dominate other people. Nimrod was a rebel against God. All of that now is what we start to think. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Who is they? They are Nimrod and his warriors, his leaders. So here's what they decide. Here's what they say. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." Now, the Bible restates this in the very next sentence. It restates what we just heard. It says, they used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. The Bible restates the very same thing we just heard because it's saying that is an important fact. It was important because up to this point, bricks had not yet been invented. And either Nimrod and his men or someone else at that same time invents bricks, discovers this new technology of building, and Nimrod decides to use it to his advantage. Of course, his advantage. What else would a person who lives their life to serve themselves do but do something to their advantage? So it says that they used brick instead of stone. Previously, people had just built things out of stone. Stone is fine for building, but stone is limited because, stones are such different shapes and sizes, and it's difficult to build anything, especially if you're going to build things high. Because again, it's hard to stack stones on top of one another, especially if you don't have anything to glue it together. And so a new technology comes onto the scene, and it is brick and tar for mortar. And now the possibility of building just takes off, because now you have something good to build with that is uniform in size, and you can cement it together with mortar. Anytime there is a new technology on the earth, there is a new opportunity for mankind to either use it for good or bad. So somebody wants to build in Shinar. Shinar is the place where Babylon is. Babylon is the place, according to Genesis 10, that a man named Nimrod founded, a man who is a rebel against God, who has evil desires, who is selfish, who has decided that his purpose on earth, if anything at all, is just to serve himself. And so, he and his fellow leaders, they say, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, Babylon, with a tower, the Tower of Babel, that reaches to the heavens, high up in the sky, higher than anything had ever been built before." Why? Not so that we can use that to touch the world, not so that we can use our building efforts to make the world a better place, not so that we can help people, but so that we can make a name for ourselves. What would building a tower do to make a name? Well, obviously, it would look impressive for a people that had typically just been building walls out of stones. This would look impressive to see something built to the heavens, something grand and glorious and tall like this. But it would also be a reminder, should you be a person like Nimrod, it would also be a reminder that I can do great and mighty things, and I am the leader, and you better not mess with me. Because look what I can do. Look what my people can do. Look at our organization. Look at our strength. And imagine what could happen to you with our power if you get in our way. So, again, review this. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." And we don't want that, because we cannot rule people. We cannot dominate people if they are scattered over the whole earth. We need them in clusters so that we can rule and dominate. And this is the first instances, according to the Bible, of empire building. This is the first instance of a group of people wanting to dominate others with military power or economic strength, to dominate those that are weaker, to force their will on others. We don't want them to be scattered over the face of the earth, because we can't dominate them if that's the case. And in this instance, God decides that he's going to put a stop to this. While there are all sorts of cases now where there's empire building and people dominating others, at least in the very first instance, God says, I don't like this ever, but I'm going to put a stop to it. I'm going to slow it down. We just came off of the whole horror of flooding the earth, and I don't want it to go bad this quickly. And so, it says in Genesis 11:5, the Lord came down, which is another way of saying the Lord was taking notice, came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. And then God reasons. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. So God in his reasoning says, this is not good. Empire building is not good. Using your military strength and your economic advantage to take advantage of other people and to dominate people is not good. And if you're doing this because it's easier since you can speak all the same language, I am going to insert some confusion in this to slow you down. This is the biblical reason for different languages coming into the earth. Genesis 11:9. This is why it was called Babel or Babel. Babel, like a baby babbles. Because it sounded like babbling, because people are speaking in different languages, and there's this frustration, and it's an effort on God's part to slow down evil that's being created by an evil man who wants to start an evil empire. This is why it was called Babel or Babylon, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth, and at least for a while, God thwarted the plans of a group of people ruling and dominating others just for the sake of power. Interesting that one single solitary life, Nimrod, a life used selfishly, a life who he might not have felt had any other purpose than to gain power or money or influence, to make himself rich, to maybe support his own family, a life whose meaning in his mind had no more to do with anything but that. It's interesting how much effect he still had, and that a group of people in Michigan thousands of years later are still thinking about his life. You see, here's the thing. We have tremendous power and ability as human beings. We have the power to create. We have the power to dream. We have the power to build. We have the power to build good things for our lives and for our families' lives, and most of all for the betterment of others. We have the power. We have so much power and ability in our single solitary lives. We also have the ability to build bad into our lives, into the lives of others. And don't mistake this. You are a builder. You're all building. You might be having a mental argument with me right now, and you're saying, well, I could never affect the world, good or bad, like Nimrod did. And maybe that's true, maybe not. I don't know, but you are a builder. And what you do matters. What you do matters. What your single solitary life does and is matters. And you build. You do. And what we build will be determined by how we view our purpose in life. We don't have Nimrod here to talk to him or interview him, but I suppose Nimrod would say that his purpose in life was to rule. His purpose in life was to devour others. His purpose in life was to be the king, the ruler. His purpose in life was to be happy, to be successful. And so he did what he did, because that's how he viewed his purpose in life. And what we build is greatly going to be determined by how we view our purpose in life. If we view we have a purpose at all, you don't really think that you have much of a purpose and all, that will dictate what you will build. So we are starting today a series out of the Purpose-Driven Life. It has been repackaged, new cover on it, a few more chapters at the end added, and now it's called What on Earth Am I Here For?, which was the subtitle of the old book, Purpose-Driven Life. But if you have the Purpose-Driven Life that you've read years ago, it's time to read it again, because it's a really good book. And if you don't have it, we've got some copies available for $10, or you can get it online for $10, and you can download it on an e-reader for $10. You can get it on audible.com. And the whole idea that Pastor Rick Warren is doing is trying to get us, one, to see that we do have a purpose, and secondly, to explore what our purpose is, because whatever we determine our purpose is will determine what we build in life. And whether or not we even think of our purpose or what we're building, I'll tell you this. Pastor Warren says everyone's life is driven by something. That's page 17. Everyone's driven by something. And that will also determine what you build. You could be going through life like most people, not even thinking of what your purpose is, because we're so busy living life. We're so busy doing what we do just to exist, just to stay alive, just to keep people fed, just to do whatever we do, to keep our schedules. We're so busy living life. We might even think that we ultimately have a purpose, but we never think about it. But something still is driving you that will determine what you are building. And so he says in this first section that I encourage you to read this week, he says things people typically are driven by, things like guilt and resentment or fear or materialism or approval. He is saying you might not even realize this, but you're driven by something. You may or may not realize or think about the fact that you have a purpose in life, but regardless of whether you even think about it, there is something that drives you, and whatever you're driven by is what you will end up building. And lots of people, he is saying, are driven by guilt. Guilt. Can't let go. Can't forgive ourselves. Won't forgive ourselves. Something in the past. And that, he talks about it more. He talks about each one of these more. But that is a driver that's going to determine what you build. And in other people, he says, is resentment. They are so resentful towards somebody or something in their past. And resentment is what they end up building based on. Other people, it's fear. Fear of the past, fear of the present, fear of the future, fear. For many people, it is the myth of more. Materialism. If I get this, if I can just acquire this, if I can just get to this level, if I can just get this or that, then I will be. And that's a driver. Or approval. If I could just be approved by this person, that person, this group. So in this book, in our study together over the next several weeks together, the hope is that not only will we stop and think and try to pull back from our fast-paced life to stop and really think, do we have a purpose or not? But that we will try to determine what that purpose is based on Scripture. Because your life may not change the world like Nimrod's did, but your life will change others. Whether you think you have a purpose or not, your life builds. Whether you think about this or not, your life is building today. Depending on what you are driven by. So here's some overall thoughts that this chapter is talking about and that we'll kind of think about over the next few weeks together. I mean, what if we really did believe that we are not an accident? What if we really did believe that there is a God who designed the world, and everything that God does, everything he designs has purpose, or he wouldn't be God. God doesn't do things just for no reason at all. Whatever God does is for a reason. And so what if we believed there was a God, and what if we believed that every single one of us is here not because of random cause, but every one of us is here because there was a God who at one moment in history thought of just you and how you would be and what you would be shaped like and how you could have a purpose. What if we're not here by accident? Would that change how we view life? What if we believed that, to follow that along, that our life therefore has divine purpose? Would God make something intentionally for no purpose? Of course not. He is God. God wouldn't do things for no reason at all. So what if we believe that we're not an accident? And what if we believe that we have not just our purpose, but we have a divine purpose? One of my most favorite beginning sentences in any book I've ever read is in this one. And after the prologue and the scriptures and stuff, the very first sentence is, "It's not about you." That's the whole sentence. That's the whole start of this whole book. It's not about you. What if we are not here by accident? And what if life consists more of whatever we think life should be? Whatever we think our purpose should be, whatever we think our goals should be. What if there is a divine purpose for our life before we were even born? Would that matter of how we view this 24-hour period? What if we believed that all that happens to us has a purpose? Wouldn't that be wonderful? What if those passages of Scripture are really true, that says all the things that happen, good or bad, God knows about and God works all of those for somehow he brings purpose and good in them? And what if all of that was used to design somehow and to make sense somehow in a grand purpose, that it wasn't just painful throwaway experiences? But what if everything that happens to us really does have divine, purposeful meaning? Wouldn't that matter how we look at life? Wouldn't that make every situation somehow something that is worth getting through? And finally, what if this is not all there is? here randomly? What if we're not here by some cosmic, weird happening or mistake? What if we're here on purpose? What if we have a purpose that is bigger than us? And what if life in our existence is more than just waking up, feeding ourselves, going to work, coming home, watching TV, going to bed, doing it all over the next day, and partying on the weekend? What if life was more than that? What if life was even more than getting acquainted with and loving our family? What if this is not all there is? What if today not only impacts tomorrow, but it impacts a year from now? And what if our life today impacts eternity? What if we decide that what we do in loving God and getting to know Him better is not just about today? What if the way that we love people is not just about today or next year? What if serving our community, what if that's not just about how we decide to do things as a congregation for this year, but what if it touches people's lives for all of eternity? Doesn't that give us something to get excited about and to live for? We're going to talk about a lot of things as we look at this question of what on earth am I here for? You don't have to get this book. You don't have to read it, because I'll be summing things up as we go, but if you'd like to, you can. We still have a few copies left today. We'll get more probably for next week, but download it again. It's an awesome book that we're going to be reading together. And the question today is your life purpose-driven or just driven?